were you familiar with the term orthographic mapping? So if you haven't answered that already, we'd love to know. I love to see these faces too. Thanks for showing up, honey, and friend, and Allison and Annette. Welcome, Brenda. Oh, so some folks have already got that. Hey, Deb, welcome. And Pauline learned it from letters. Awesome. Mary, yeah, look at what you. How many of you learned it because of this Facebook group that Donna started?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. Impressive. Wow. Look at that. Rachel, Mary, Miss Lucrezia.
Well, that makes me feel good.
Yes, you guys. Marcia and Kelly. Lisa says, yes, I learned most everything from this group.
Why we work so hard.
Mm-hmm. Deb, good point. David Kilpatrick's book, Essentials, with a long title after it, is probably the most famous way of people getting that information out there. It was just not in the public domain. Even the reading researchers weren't talking about it that much, and he went and made it more clear to the rest of us.
Okay, it is 7 o'clock. Should we get started, Marnie?
Sure.
Right. Welcome, everyone. I am so pleased to see that we have 69 participants. I bet we'll get more. Marnie is a Wisconsin resident, as I am, but she's far away. She's 3 hours from me. But I don't even remember how we met, but I'm so glad we did.
The Reading League.
Ah, okay. So yes, we both belong to the Reading League. And in case you don't know what that is, it's an organization that promotes evidence-based instruction. So there are some chapters in the throughout the United States, but there's a main chapter out of New York, and anyone can belong to it. Doesn't require any payment of any kind. Just sign up. So anyway, Marnie and I have been working on this reading thing. She, for I don't know, 20-something years, right? And I've lost count for how long I've been doing it, but Marnie's a tutor, and she's a former classroom teacher, and she's a reading researcher, and she's the creator of an innovative approach to the teaching of reading. And I'm so glad you're here tonight to find out what that is, because I think it's going to change some of your instruction. And I know it has for me. So welcome, Marnie Ginsberg.
Thank you. Thanks for everybody being here. Some familiar faces and some ones I hope will be familiar soon. I get to maybe get to know some of you. And thanks so much to Donna for first inviting me to share this information. I hope I can be effective in communicating some important ideas. And also thank you so much, Donna, for creating this amazing Facebook group. I know it has changed, as people said today in the chat before we went live, people were saying how it has taught them almost everything that they've learned about reading research. They've learned terms about like phonemic awareness and orthographic mapping because of this group. And certainly those of us who haven't learned it from there, we are feeling, I think, community and a sense of purpose and mission because of the energy of this group, which I was telling Donna earlier today, is like, I've never seen a Facebook group this engaged, right? You're just getting a lot of notifications if you're a reading nerd like me. So thanks for that very, very much. Okay, so I am going to try to share my screen and get started with this topic of how Reading Simplified spurs phonemic awareness and orthographic mapping. Can you see my slides?
Yes.
Okay, let's see if I can try it this way.
So I wanted to add, if you have a question, a comment, please put it in the chat, because are you going to be answering as you go along, or do you prefer at the end?
Right. I do try to answer those that I can, but of course I won't be able to answer everything. And the goal is that we're going to go across 2 different nights, this Thursday and the following Thursday. I'm going to try to keep today to 45 minutes and then leave time for question and answer. So I won't actually cover the whole 9 yards of Reading Simplified tonight, but let me just see. I think I'm going to change around my screens on my end, you guys. Excuse me for a second. Okay. Can you still see the slides?
No.
No. Okay. Well, how about now?
I'm just seeing the gallery. Maybe it's
Okay,
me.
let's try it again.
Wait,
Sorry
wait.
about that.
You're on. It was me,
Okay.
I think.
Oh, okay. So you can see,
I can see you.
yeah, and can you see my whole screen or just the power? I think you can see my whole screen instead of just the PowerPoint.
I see you.
Just me. Okay.
Yep.
Let's try this again. Share screen. Hey, maybe we can do it this way. There we go.
There we go.
Can you see that?
Yep.
Okay, thanks you guys for your patience. Let's get moving. Again, if you're just popping in, I would like to take questions, and if I can't get to it as we go, then maybe at the end, and maybe next week if I can't get to it this week, okay? So pop them in the chat, and maybe Donna or others can answer them too, because I know we have some Reading Simplified pros here besides me. Okay, this is my plan for across the 2 nights, this Thursday and the following Thursday. I would like to define phonemic awareness and orthographic mapping and why they're important. And then I want to try to zero in from there on a streamlined lens about these big ideas in reading, because they can be overwhelming and kind of make us dizzy with all the things that we should do. I'm trying to narrow that focus, which is always what I'm doing with Reading Simplified. And then I want to get into Reading Simplified in particular. We have a 3-part lesson and talk about how it spurs phonemic awareness, orthographic mapping, and just a reading achievement in general. Along the way, we'll try to show some video examples and then different activities and have Q&A. But today there's a lot more of the prep theory background, so we might not get to as many videos as we will next week. And this is here now going live in the Facebook group, so if you have to leave or you can't catch all of it, you'll be able to see it in the Facebook group if you just scroll back or search for it. So just briefly, a little bit about me. I'm kind of obsessing about reading and have been ever since the late 90s when I was a 6th grade teacher and my 6th grade students were reading at the 4th grade level. How many of you can relate to that? Ben have had students that are way behind. And not only that, but I didn't know what to do to solve that problem. So I have been asking questions like, why didn't I learn this in my master's in my reading class? And how am I going to solve that issue? And so I got obsessed with it, read everything I could get my hands on, and found it to be confusing. Eventually found something that worked, started tutoring, and then expanded that to a tutoring company. Then I realized all the teachers that are in my environment in the Chapel Hill, North Carolina area, Durham, Raleigh, they're doing other things than what I'm finding is effective as a tutor. Maybe I'll go get a doctorate and do research on this, get to the University of North Carolina, and I realize, lo and behold, actually, there's a ton of research on this already. It's not like we've answered everything in the field of reading, but in terms of the fundamentals about how kids learn to read words, we've known this for a long time, and what mainstream practice is doing is often contrary to what the research says. So I found out there as a doc student about the research to practice gap. And then let me tell you about some of the things that played into what I'm bringing to you today, Reading Simplified. So as a doc student, you just spend a lot of time reading. I learned a ton in the field of reading education. It's taking a hit right now because of us, people like us saying we didn't learn some things. Indeed, there's a lot of missing pieces, but I also learned a lot of wonderful, valuable things along the way, just not about the core about how to teach word learning, but there were other things about reading that I learned along the way that are essential. And then I got to create a reading intervention called the targeted reading intervention. You could look that up. There are several published articles in notable reading journals on that have gotten good effect sizes, 0.3 to 0.7, including comprehension. Mostly it hits all the reading measures when we test it. And that was a really unusual thing that I got to do as a doc student. And then afterwards, as after I finished my program. So the roots of the targeted reading intervention come from Montessori, which is an over 100-year-old approach to teaching reading. She started kids who were 3, 4, and 5 learning how to read by asking them to listen to the sounds they heard in words. What's the first sound you hear? And then she asked them to spell words. Okay, how would you spell the word sat or cat? That you can see the thread of that here. And then Linda Mood's reading program had a very important tracking program, which is the foundation of our, what we call Switch It. Phonographics built off of those things and what I found in the 90s and really made a difference for me. And then later on, I learned more about the importance of word frequency, how many exposures we're getting and concentrated times and which words we're getting. This plays into orthographic mapping. I also learned about shared self-teaching theory, which I'll talk about today. And a lot of what you can see as a thread with Reading Simplified comes from the Matthew Effects paper, because there was a lot of gems in there. That's from 1986. Probably when I was a student, it was like the most cited paper ever. So all of those things have been put into Reading Simplified. And what I'm trying to do here with Reading Simplified is this, that it's a system that streamlines the process of learning the teaching of reading for beginning readers, struggling readers, or students with dyslexia. It's also a streamlined method of delivery for the child. So it's both to help you, the teacher, the parent, the grandparent, figure out an approach, but at the same time, it's also faster and streamlined for the child. And along the way, most students learn to read at an accelerated pace. We're going to eventually move here. This is that 3-component lesson plan I was talking about. This is one of the ways we save time and streamline how we teach reading, because almost everything you need to do to teach word learning, I'm not talking about comprehension in the more global high-level approach, other than what does it take to become fluent, most of it can be accomplished with these 3 components. So whether you're working in a whole group, small group, or one-on-one, we try to make sure you get to all 3 of these components: rereading for fluency, word work, and guided oral reading. Every day, if we can get to those, that's the best situation. And word work is the teaching of decoding and high frequency words, and that we can condense most of what we do down to just a handful of activities. So we can do either build it or switch it, depending on how advanced the kids are. Most of our kids are spending most of their time with switch it, which we'll show you. We could do read it or sort it, again, depending on where they are in their development is a decoder, and then write it. That is all. I shouldn't say it's 100%, but that is the gist of what we do. Those are the pieces that we play with. And when we tweak things, we're tweaking off of this. We're riffing off of read it, we're riffing off of write it. So this is just a big picture. We're going to actually go more into theory and then cycle back around to this, because the promise of this presentation is how Reading Simplified, particularly through this lesson plan, spurs phonemic awareness and orthographic mapping. Now, some of you could be here and be ready to teach about orthographic mapping and phonemic awareness, but some of you may be new. And I know that's part of Donna's mission, is to gather a flock of people from all over who have been like her and been like me, not knowing the basics and needing to be guided. And so I'm hoping to make sure that I give you some foundational things, but also for those of you who are pros, maybe give you a streamlined lens, as I said earlier. One of the biggest problems we have in the teaching of reading, actually worldwide, not just here in the US, is people think that reading is visual, that learning to read is a visual accomplishment, and that you recognize the words based on the visual array and what they look like. And of course, we do need to use our eyes. That's certainly it, but that's not the route. Vision is not really the primary route that's essential, and there's something hidden that a lot of people don't know about, and that's where phonemic awareness is going to come in, because actually learning to read depends heavily on processing the sounds of our language. And this is a fundamental problem that we have with a lot of reading programs. They don't really focus first on, let's present the sounds that the kids already know, and then match that up to symbols like the phonics information. So phonology is the area of our brain, or it's a system of the sounds of language not their spelling, and not their meaning, but their sounds. So in the word sound, you'll hear s, ow, n, d. That has to do with phonology. That's kind of a big umbrella category. More specifically, we're going to be talking about phonemic awareness, which I will define. So why is phonology such a big deal? Why are sounds such a big deal? I bet most of you could write me the answer. Does anybody want to do that real quickly? Why is it such a big deal that I'm going to stress phonology and stress that we talk about phonemic awareness? Why is that such a big deal? There might be a little lag. Anybody? Here's my thoughts on that. It's because our writing system is a code for sounds. That's right, Jennifer. Sounds are the basis of our oral and written language. Kids already can use the sounds to speak. They have the oral language. We have to be able to share with them the written language, and it's a code. Barbara, written language is based off of oral language, right? You need to use the left side of your brain. That's where our phonology is for the most part. Catherine, I love it. Written words are made up of strings of sounds. Exactly. That is the code. If you are trying to learn some tricky code, you have to know how to transform one thing to another. And it's phonemic processing that does that for us. The key to unlock this code is fast processing of the sounds and words, or being able to hear those individual sounds or phonemes. And when I say phoneme, I mean individual sounds. Again, back to the word sound, these are the phonemes. S, ow, n, d. So if you're going to teach a code, you have to know the way to make it work. So if you're looking at the word reading, you have to break it down into its graphemes or phonics information like R and EA and D. And you have to see how that lines up with particular phonemes, the R, E, D. When we line those things up, that's how we crack the code. The graphemes are on the left. Those are letters or letter combinations. The R is a grapheme, the EA is a grapheme. Those are the words, the graphemes in reading. We need to line those up with the phonemes, the individual sounds, the R. So we have on the left, we have the R, and we need to line that up with a R. And we have the EA, we need to line that up with E, D and D, I and I, my other finger, and NG. So phonemic awareness and accurate sound-based decoding practice allows these connections to be made. So if we don't perceive the sounds in words, then those jumbles of squiggles, those letters, they have very little meaning. We don't get the code without this access to the sounds and words. So this is important. Why I think to some extent, not entirely, but to some extent, we've been having the reading wars, whole language or whole word approaches versus phonics, is because some kids actually do struggle with phonics if phonics is not tied with phonemic awareness. Because this model is really how the sound breaking, the sound-based decoding or the code breaking happens. Kids zip together the sounds and the letters, the graphemes and the phonemes. And the phonics information, sure, it's important. We have to know that R is R and EA can be E. We have to know that phonics information. But the sound perception or phonemic awareness is what enables us to get that. And those two things together, lining all that up is how sound-based decoding happens. So as a teacher, you are trying to help kids make those connections and form them and build upon them. So here back is to the big idea about phonemic awareness. It's a term reading researchers settled on to describe the processing of individual speech sounds or phonemes in words. The processing, blending, segmenting, manipulating, being able to hear that flack has a l in the second spot of that word. And maybe changing things around, changing Band to bend, that would require you to process sounds and words. That's phonemic awareness. And this has been an overwhelming finding in reading research. I was studying this a ton as a doc student. And I think David Kilpatrick has pointed out, sometimes people aren't even studying the question of, is phonemic awareness causally related to reading anymore, because it's so well documented. So this big idea from 50 years of research is that phonemic awareness prepares the way for early, strong reading acquisition. It's the #1 predictor of early reading achievement. Letter sound knowledge also goes along with that, but often various studies will find PA, phonemic awareness, is the biggest predictor, which is unbelievable, because almost in any other academic realm, SES or socioeconomic status or IQ will be what you find predicts achievement. So researchers, social scientists are always, okay, after you take out IQ, then what predicts X, Y, or Z? But actually, it's phonemic awareness that's more dominant predictor. And many students do not develop it without instruction. This is kind of going back to what I was saying earlier. If you just teach phonics and try to get half of the zipper, and kids don't have anything to anchor it to, because it's not naturally developing in them, they're going to be frustrated. So we as teachers and schools and publishers, literacy coaches, we need to be making sure that kids are getting that instruction and zipping that information up. Good question, good answers here for that question about phonemic awareness versus phonics. Thank you. And finally, this may be a little bit more controversial, but there's a strong trending research base to say this, that phonemic awareness is actually just a means to an end of getting to quick sound-based decoding. You don't need to get a master's in phonemic awareness. Yeah, you do need to be good at it, but it's only because you're a reader that you're good at it. It's anything you do in the context of reading is going to be the best bang for your buck. We're finding that students develop phonemic awareness best when they're doing it in the context of words and spelling. And that's one of the threads that you see in Reading Simplified, as we're, even with the absolute beginners, we are throwing them in the deep end, trying to get them to read words, build words, and develop phonemic awareness, even if they didn't have a lick of it to start with. I'll show you a video of that. And it's in that context of real words that phonemic awareness and phonics start to zip up, that sound-based decoding starts to get developed. Okay, so that was phonemic awareness. That's our big idea and a little research background. Are there any questions about that before I move on? And then I'll get into orthographic mapping, which is a little trickier, more of a $5 word. Is this a $10 word?
Marnie, can you repeat what you just said? Phonemic awareness is best when used with?
In the context of word reading and spelling.
Thank you.
Now, it definitely works. And we have causal studies that will show if you teach phonemic awareness in isolation, it will help kids become better readers. So that's good. I just think great is doing it in the context of reading. So you'll just save time and accelerate the process that way. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions. If there are, let me know. We can maybe answer them later, but let's move on to orthographic mapping. So orthographic mapping, do you know what ortho means? Who had Greek and Latin? I didn't get to study that much of it, figured out some of it. You got, Catherine, you're totally right about that. We'll slip in a little bit more about advanced phonemic awareness later. So ortho is the root word meaning straight. And so that's why I put that picture in of the orthodontia. We have crooked teeth and we want to make them straight. The orthodontist is the one that makes that right or correct or straight. That's right, Catherine, right, correct. And graph has to do with writing. So you put that together, straight, correct, right, spelling, or written language. So we're talking earlier about phonology, the sounds. Now we're moving into talking about orthography. That has to do with the spellings, how the graphemes and words look. So this is the correct spelling information at the individual grapheme level, like the G is G, or even the more global level, that ITCH is itch, like in pitch, which. And of course, also knowledge of words. You see the word remember and you recognize it at a glance. The orthography, the spelling of remember is stuck there. So over time, this is, if you're developing as a reader, this is what your orthographic learning looks like. First, you learn a little bit about the letter sounds, that A can be a or maybe you'll learn that a little later. And you learn some simple words though, like you learn cat and that. And then you learn more advanced phonics, like the OA can be O. And then you start to notice larger chunks of words like app and ing. You also learn longer words, multisyllable words like simple, and other chunks like pre and om. So you're learning orthography or spelling over time, from the individual graphemes to larger graphemes to full words. All of that is an intertwined mixture that develops with the good reader. And it's our struggling readers that have trouble with that. But orthographic mapping is specifically the mental process we use to permanently store words for immediately effortless retrieval. And this is the magic that you see with some kids. They decode something laboriously, they turn the page, they see it again, and in a second, they learned it, they said it without sounding it out. They had orthographically mapped that word. So researchers also say that when a word has been orthographically mapped, it is a sight word. And by that, they mean a word that you see and you instantly know it by sight. You don't so much attack it from left to right, sounding it out. Although phonology and sound-based decoding is still involved in that process, and some researchers have done some pretty cool experiments to see that even mature adult readers still rely on phonology to attack words that they know instantaneously. But it's still that we see words so fast. It's actually, to me, it is a miracle how fast we read words. Since before the last century, we've known that if you flash like a letter or number or an object up to someone, or you flash a word, people can recognize the word faster. Why is it a word, even a long word like elephant, can be recognized faster than the E or a picture of the elephant? And you can even trick people and show it so briefly that they think they haven't seen the word, but when you give them a little quiz about something after it, their brain will trigger the word like elephant, if that's what the word was. It's just, our brains are amazing for how they are able to read so quickly. And that's really helpful for us to, if you're going to read War and Peace, you cannot laboriously attack every word and think about those deep ideas, right? You have to be moving through those words in split seconds. And so that's what our orthographic learning is. Words that we see in an instant, we know it automatically. It's a sight word in the sense that we see it by sight and we know it instantaneously. It's not the same thing as just the high frequency words or irregular words. That's not what I mean when I say sight words. So orthographic mapping particularly is explaining that process. You sound out a word, and then after a few exposures, it becomes a unit. It becomes an item that you can recognize in a split second, literally less than a quarter of a second. So here's how that process goes. Say you see the word boat, you have to notice, this is for the beginner. You have to notice the sounds and words. Or actually, let's start with the phonemes or the graphemes. Let's start with the letters. You notice the phonics elements. You notice the B, you notice the OA, you notice the T, and you assign those, you code crack with phonemes. So the B is B, the OA is O, the T is T. You're connecting the graphemes and the sounds, and that's how you figure out, oh, this word is boat. So that process I just described to you right now, that is sound-based decoding. You have to see the phonics, translate it through phonemic awareness to some sounds in your language, and then you come up with a meaningful word at the end. How many of you have kids that are going through that process right now, trying to sound out a word? They don't recognize it by sight. They have not orthographically mapped it. I've got a student right now with some pretty severe dyslexic tendencies, and we're sounding out a lot of words. They are not enough of them yet are becoming orthographically mapped. How many of you got students like that? So this is the first step in the process. Barbara says yes. If you're teaching, you probably do have them. Then what happens is you need to see that word. And with typically developing kids, it can happen that after just one exposure to sounding it out or sound-based decoding, that word becomes orthographically mapped. It becomes a word that you see on sight. You will never forget it. Even if you don't see it for 5 years, you'll still remember it. It's really amazing. Kim's like, you bet I've got kids that are working on their sound-based decoding. Nick says he's a first grade teacher. That's the whole job of first grade, practically. Okay, thanks, you guys. So you attack the word from a sound-based decoding, and you use your phonemic awareness to be able to do that. Of course, you also have to have phonemic phonics knowledge. And then you need to have practice doing it, either reading it or spelling it a couple times. And that is when the word will become orthographically mapped. So it's the sound-based decoding followed by practice that allows the word to become a sight word or to be orthographically learned, something that's stuck there. I'm pointing to the left side of the brain because we now know that from brain scans that there's a little tiny region where those words are stored if we're storing them the way that a good reader stores them. Barbara's asking about meaning. Let's get into that, Barbara. Thank you. Good question. So orthographic mapping is how the words are stored, and phonemic awareness is essential for the early reading development because that provides the avenue to allow for storage. You have to connect the sounds that you hear, you perceive them, you have to process those sounds, line them up with specific phonics information. And only when that's the cracking the code, your brain figures out that that's the code. And the reason that Barbara's bringing up meaning is because this phonology is always tied into meaning. And we'll get to that right here. This is a model of reading that is very well known, and it has a lot of correlation too with what we see with brain scans. There's different regions for meaning, different regions for phonology and some spelling. So let me explain what this might look like. So you see here the meaning of the word is cat. Okay, when we think of the word cat, usually we think of an animal. The context for that word in the text might be the cat is playful, and that helps us understand more about the particular word. But what else do we need? We also need to tie that into the phonology, sound base. So it's not just cat, but we have to crack something of that word into its component parts, its individual phonemes, and that's k, a, t. And then we need to tie that with specific spellings. The k ties up with the spelling of C. The a ties up with the spelling of A. The t ties up with the spelling of T. That is orthography. All of these things in the brain are linked. And when we do this process well, the orthographic mapping process happens. The word is attacked from a sound-based decoding perspective, and then it becomes a unit, a thing. It's no longer just C-A-T, it's no longer just k-at, but it's cat, and it triggers the meaning, it triggers the sounds, it triggers even the spelling. And the reason that earlier we talked about, phonemic awareness being the #1 predictor, and a lot of kids don't have it. And so this is the part of the word learning model that is most often missing for our kids. Some kids have a harder time developing it, and a lot of our programs don't do it. So we're going to really focus on that with Reading Simplified, because we find that it really streamlines this whole process. So it's phonology that connects to spelling, and that's the route that we become good readers. So orthographic mapping is the brain's work when the learner is relying on a sound-based decoding approach. So first comes sound-based decoding, and then orthographic mapping will happen when that foundation is secure. So let me get a little bit more into orthographic mapping, because that is sometimes one of the more daunting things. We mentioned earlier David Kilpatrick's definition. He was mostly going back and summarizing the work of Linnea Airy, who's been doing this work since the 80s, really studying how is it that kids learn these words. It's amazing how we learn them so fast. Most of us learn a lot of words really rapidly by the end of 4th grade, and 4,000 words, and you're trudging through 50 or 100 in kindergarten, and it's like up from there. It's like a geometric curve up from there. So this is a pivotal article she wrote in Scientific Studies of Reading, which is a really good research journal, and she was summarizing orthographic mapping. And this is what she says. And this is where I'm trying to get now into closer to a simpler vision for how phonemic awareness and orthographic mapping relate and how that will relate to instruction. So I know I'm doing a lot of theory, so hang in there with me. Orthographic mapping occurs in the course of reading specific words. Readers form connections between written units, either single graphemes like or sh, the M or the SH, or larger spelling patterns like pre, and spoken units, either phonemes, syllables, or morphemes. These connections are retained in memory. This is the orthographic mapping part. They're retained in memory along with meanings and enable readers to recognize the words by sight. That bolding in yellow is mine. An important consequence of orthographic mapping is that the spelling of words enter memory and influence vocabulary learning, the processing of phonological constituents in words, in other words, the processing of all that phonemic information, and phonological memory. All of those things work together. And so once you learn the spelling of a word, and I tell you the word, maybe 4 years later, you'll still to some extent pull up a visual image of that word. That's because the orthography your brain has changed to not only have the meaning, not only hear the sounds, but now tie it into the spelling, all back to that process, that 4-part processor by Seidenberg. So here's the key thing that's going to drive us towards what we're trying to present with Reading Simplified. And I know what you're trying to do with whatever reading approach you're doing. What sort of instruction teaches students spontaneous orthographic mapping? And here is the rub. First, it entails teaching students the knowledge and skills that enable connections to be activated when words are seen and read. This includes teaching the written system, beginning with grapheme-phoneme relations or letter-sound connections, teaching phonemic segmentation, and teaching a decoding strategy for reading novel or new words. Okay, did you get that? She said there's 3 things you need to do to get the sound-based decoding. And then she says, second, it entails having students practice using these skills to read and spell words. So let's break that down even more. I'm just going to repeat that second sentence of hers. It involves teaching the writing system, beginning with grapheme-phoneme relations. And it involves teaching phonemic segmentation. That is the first doorway to unlock the code. And it involves teaching a decoding strategy for reading novel words. You have to figure out a way to attack a word you haven't learned before. You have to have a decoding strategy. So that's it. That's the first thing you have to do for sound-based decoding. The second thing she said to do was reread or practice. Right here, the last sentence. Second, it entails having students practice using these skills to read and spell words. So that's how we get orthographic mapping to happen. We build a sound-based decoding foundation, and then they practice either spelling or reading or both. And then the words get stuck into memory. Here it is again, just to summarize it, because reading it, there's so much research and it's so complicated, but yet this is really in the same paper, she's boiling it down to just this. Decoding letters into blended sounds helps readers figure out words they have not read before. So that's sound-based decoding, step 1. Rereading them a few times moves the words into memory so they can be read by sight. And that's the orthographic mapping. That is all there is to teaching kids how to recognize words. So I'm hoping that kind of, even though there's so many pieces, I'm hoping that formula makes the gives you a big idea for thinking about your choices in instruction. Here's another way of just writing what she just wrote. I just created this little formula. You have to have sound-based decoding, which connects the meaning, the phonology, and the orthography or the spelling, like cat, cat, C-A-T, and the meaning of the cat. You got to attack it accurately, maybe one time, maybe 4 times, maybe 40 times if you have a student with dyslexia. And then you got to practice. That's where the practice comes in, either reading it or spelling it. And then at the other side of it, you got automatic word recognition. When you have a lot of automatic word recognition and you've been cultivating meaning, most kids will be fluent, or maybe need to practice a little bit more with fluency. But automatic word recognition is the #1 thing that will move kids towards fluency, and strong fluency will lead them to good comprehension, unless there is some significant language issue. Oh, thank you, Susan and Donna. So if that's the formula, we can simplify this for our beginning readers or our struggling readers. I was talking with Donna about an adult she's working with, and he did not have the concept of the alphabetic principle. He didn't have phoneme segmentation, and he did not have all of his letter sounds. So he's missing something in each part of this formula. This is really the formula for cracking the code, getting sound-based decoding in progress, whether that's a 5-year-old or 4-year-old or an adult who just never was taught. And this is what Scher says in his self-teaching theory. He says, you have to give the alphabetic principle, the concept that our written language is code for sounds, which is where we started out at the top of the workshop. You also have to be able to pull the sounds apart, because that's going to enable you to do cat with C-A-T. It's segmenting that allows you to see, oh, that's how C-A-T fits with cat. And then you have to, of course, know some letter sounds. And so you can even start to teach kids to read with this simple formula, and you don't have to know the whole alphabet. They can know A, M, S, P, T, and you're off to the races. I'm going to show you that. That will get you started with early decoding. And Scher said, hey, you get kids doing this with those 3 pieces, they get better and better at decoding. They get better and better at phonemic awareness, because if they're decoding accurately, it's bidirectionally. They reinforce one another. And then they start to figure out more and more of the code, because Scher rightly pointed out, how many of us were taught the 40 or 50,000 words we recognize by sight? How many of us were taught that explicitly by a teacher? None of us. We had the important parts laid down for us in the foundation by a teacher or a parent, but the rest of the work we did ourselves. So this is an interesting part of the delicate dance between explicit and implicit instruction. We got to give them these pieces and a little bit more, which we'll get into, but we don't want to think that we have to teach them every phoneme, rather every grapheme in the world and every word in the world. They are going to figure out a lot of that on their own. So I have taken a little longer for the theory part, and I bet you want to see a video. So let me show you this in action with our first word work activity. So we just throw the kids in the deep end in a very nice way. So if they are new to us and they don't know the letter sounds and they don't know phonemic segmentation, maybe they don't know the alphabetic principle, we don't teach them separately. We teach them all together in the context of words. And usually with coaching in a small group or one-on-one, kids start to figure this out. This is what they're doing. They put these things together and I get how the code works. They certainly need to learn a lot more after that, but then, this is to get them started, to get them really getting how the code works. So let me show you an example of Build It. I'm going to show you 2 examples, actually Build It and Switch It, and then we'll stop and have questions, okay? So Build It is an activity we only use with beginning kids who don't know even 4 or 5 sounds. If they know like 5 or 7 sounds, we don't do Build It, we go straight to Switch It. So that's why on the chart, you choose one or the other. And if they can't segment, then we would do Build It. But look at all the things that this activity does. It will implicitly teach the concept of the word. It will implicitly teach the concept of the alphabetic principle that our written language is code for sounds. It will help the kid phonemically segment, which is critical for getting the alphabetic principle, critical for getting how sounds and symbols mapped on together. And even in this activity, they learn the letter sounds. They don't actually have to be taught the letter sounds first. They learn them in the context of the activity. This is how we accelerate. This is one of the ways in which we accelerate. So this is going to demonstrate early decoding, and it's also going to help with early spelling. And of course, there's going to be left to right tracking. So this is an activity that, like I said, Montessori was doing over 100 years ago. And she got her Italian students who had been given to her because they were, in the terms of the day, they were considered retarded and not capable. And they kind of just wanted to shove off this female physician onto that and not have to deal with her because she was the first female physician in Italy. And she studied what they needed and she got them doing this type of thing and reading, and they passed the state exams and stunned the world, really. That's how she became famous. So she was on the cutting edge of phonemic awareness, even though she didn't call it phonemic awareness. So I'm going to show you a 4-year-old who was in preschool and he'd had some letter name instruction, but no letter sound instruction, or at least it wasn't sticking. He didn't have any phonemic awareness instruction that I was aware of. I couldn't see it when I kind of quizzed him. And he certainly didn't seem to know the concept of the alphabetic principle. So again, I'm just going to throw him in the deep end with Build It. And I'm going to do this activity with him for 3 days to try to develop all of these things here that you see on the screen, all these sub skills for the teaching of reading. And then I did 3 days of Build It, and then I did 2 days of Switch It because he advanced. He figured out enough letter sounds. He got better at phoneme segmentation. So I added the harder level of phoneme manipulation. Let's change sat to sit. And Switch It is more challenging. So the kids learn faster that way. So that's why I switched to Switch It. So I'm going to show you an example of Build It on day 1, and then I'll show you an example of Switch It on day 5. And across those 5 days, he learned 13 letter sounds. He learned to segment 3 sound words, manipulate to some extent 3 sound words. And he certainly had the alphabetic principle. He certainly had left to right tracking and concept of word, because we put all these things together at the beginning and tied phonemic awareness with sound-based decoding. And we're now getting off to the races to be able to orthographically map. These words are probably not orthographically mapped yet, but it is the first step. Okay, are you following this claim here? It may be. I know this is very different from most approaches. So just give it a chance. See what can happen. So the first day, it's a struggle, and that's normal. We coach you with the tips for what to kind of coach a kid to get him up over his the hurdle, whatever he's facing. So this is the beginning, the very first time he's being introduced to Build It, being introduced to the alphabetic principle, segmenting, and these even letter sounds. So I'm going to try to share this video. Make sure I choose the right one. Okay, day 1.
Okay, so I just want to play some games with sounds, okay? How does that sound? A short little game. We're going to make a word. Let's make a word like...
How about my name? It's easy.
That's a good one, but I don't have all those letters. So how about we try mat, like to wipe your feet on the mat. Okay? So if I was to listen for the sound at the beginning of the word,
Okay.
Mat, what would I hear here at the beginning of mat? What do you hear at the beginning? I think you're right. Now look carefully. Which one of these is That's it. Now pull it down and say You did it. Okay. Let's try the next one. What is the sound that you hear right here when I say mat? You have What's here in the word mat?
You knew.
I hear ah. Do you hear ah right there? Mat. You hear that ah?
Yeah.
Can you say ah?
Ah.
Okay, now think carefully. Which one do you think is ah? Ah. Pull it down, say ah. You're almost done. Look, you've already built ah. You have the beginning of the word mat. But what goes over here after ma? We need something over here.
I don't know what it is.
Okay, let's listen. Listen. You have mat, and we're going to build the word mat. Mat.
I hear a T.
I do too. What sound is it?
A T.
But what sound comes out of my mouth? Mat. What just came out?
I don't know.
Can you copy what I did? Mat. You said the letter name, but what sound is it when we see this? When we see this, we say, can you say, look at what you did. Did you know you could build a word? You said you didn't know how to read, but you just built your first word. Look, you built the word mat. Okay, let's check the sounds. A, mat. Now your turn. Let's do it together. At. Nice job.
So that was obviously a lot of teacher scaffolding, but he's starting to crack some of those things that we were talking about, a little bit about the concept of the alphabetic principle, a little bit of phonemic segmentation. He was actually able to break apart the first sound and the last sound, particularly the first sound because it was a continuant consonant. That makes it a little easier. Marissa's asking a very good question. Yeah, it is more complicated when you have a whole group, but I recommend, when possible, doing it in small groups. But right now I like to show some kind of close-up videos so you can see all the nuances of learning. We have people doing it whole group, small group, and one-on-one. Okay, so let me show you him day 5. He's still a beginner. I'm not saying he's reading War and Peace, but in 5 days of pre-K, normally what would he be doing? He would be studying letter sounds, maybe in isolation. He might still be doing phonological awareness, like can you hear the syllables in words? Can you hear the rhymes in words? He wouldn't be reading or in the context of that early decoding, early spelling, but he's making things move along really rapidly with this activity. Donna, did you want to say something before I show it?
I'm
okay.
good.
All right. So let's see. This is day 5, same guy. All I did was 5 days in a row of this activity. I didn't do anything else because I just wanted to show it as how in and of itself, it stands alone very powerfully. We never recommend doing it in isolation, just this activity by itself, but it was just a mini experiment. You have had, switch it to hid. Which one are we going to take away? You got it. Put it up over here. Get rid of the ah. What sound goes there to make hid? Hid is 2 sounds. What's after ha?
Hit.
And then what? And hid. What's that sound right there after the ha? It. It. Which one is it?
It.
Okay. Did you know you could make hid?
Yeah.
Tell me the sounds. Point and tell me.
It.
And the word is
Hid.
hid. Now let's switch it to him. I know him. He's reading really well. Hid to him. Yeah, what sound do we have to take away? Yeah, we don't need the duh. But we need yeah, him. Check the sounds and point. Oh, ha. I. Him. You made the word him. Okay. Now we're going to add a couple things to our board. Some new things. Let's make him turn into hill. We had to climb up a steep hill. You have him. Switch it to hill. What should we take away? Him to hill. We need an I. We don't need the that's right. Okay. Now what sound goes there to make hill? Oh. Which one of these do you think is oh? Oh. Two letters, but one sound. Oh. You made hill. Now check to make sure you've got it. Yeah, close. Let's go back. And then this is oh. Look at it. Oh. Okay. Now I want you to switch it to will. Will you switch hill to will?
I can.
You can? I think you can. You have hill. You need to switch it to will. What's that sound that's different? Well, we have an O over here. Look at as I point. You have hill. We need will.
Why?
We need a W. Where are we going to put it? At the beginning. That's right. Woo. Which one do you think is W? We haven't done this one before. That's right. W. Good figuring. You made will. Check it. I want you to separate these. W. Oh, very nice. Okay. Okay, I was just answering someone's question. Does it work for kids with auditory processing issues? Absolutely. Having that concrete visual representation of the abstract sounds is very helpful for them, and going back and forth between sounds is forcing them to really notice the nuances, and so it's super helpful for them. Of course, they're going to take longer and it'll take more effort on the teacher's part, but it's probably the number one thing I would suggest for anyone with any kind of auditory processing or phonological processing weakness. Okay, so that was just to give you a little glimpse of the beginning of sound-based decoding. When you throw all the core ingredients into that pot, remember that formula? It's alphabetic principle, phonemic segmentation, and a few letter sounds. If you put that into a pot, stir, out comes some, a nicely made recipe of some kind. Maybe it's a cake or probably a cookie for me. This is obviously just the very beginning. This is just, 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds. What does it do for my 12-year-old who's dyslexic? Actually, we see some of the very same things at play for those kids who are older. The words get more sophisticated, and the phonemic difficulty gets more sophisticated. But we're doing the same things. We build it and go to switch it when our students know about 5 to 7 letter sounds. And then we keep folding in more and more letter sounds with this activity. This is how they just get introduced to them. It's not the only way that they're going to learn them, but it's a great way to introduce it to them. Let them show you that they can do more than you might think when they have only a handful of things to choose from. So switch it is like build it, and it's developing the alphabetic principle. It's developing phoneme segmentation, letter sound knowledge, but really what it excels at is building phonemic manipulation, which I find is so critically important for the older kids as well. It solves a lot of the beginning problems quickly, but it's really expedites and this is back to that zipper model. How do you hear the sounds and line them up to symbols? It's the processing of speech sounds, and phonemic manipulation is one of the most challenging ways we can push that with our kids. And so if you challenge them this way, then they're going to develop the thing that's most likely lacking in them. So you might start with this little guy. He went from CVC to still staying with CVC. Maybe next week I would have gone to 4 sound words. He would still be learning some letter sounds, but he could maybe have gone from, to words like help or held. But then we just keep pushing the envelope, and this is how we get to the adult reader or the 15-year-old dyslexic. We would follow this path, moving to progressively harder phonemic words and going all the way to 6 sounds. C, 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 V, C, C words like strand or sprint. Those are hard phonemically. How do you hear that? Did you hear that there's a R in sprint, and where is it? That is phonemic processing. It's hard. Switch it helps with that. And then we even get into nonsense words for kids that go that far. So this is just a peek ahead at one of the ways we save time building the foundation of sound-based decoding, because when kids get this code and how sounds and symbols line up, then they're prepared to orthographically map. So next time we come, we will talk more about the other activities, and we'll show more videos. But we just have a handful that kind of address teaching more and more of the code, and these are those. And so I'll go back to the core model. Yeah, this is what we'll expand upon this later, but what you saw today was build it and switch it. It's laying the groundwork for sound-based decoding. And they are, I hope you could see how phonemic awareness was an integral part of both of those. I was always trying to first get him to perceive the sound, because we were doing this. We were trying to get this system functioning. All right, so I went a little longer than I promised, but I'd love to answer your questions. I always go a little longer than I promise. The people here who know me can vouch for that. Let's see. Okay, so there's questions about script. Yes, that's a really good question, because what I did when he made a mistake in Build It is what everyone here who has been learning Reading Simplified would do as well. So the cue when there's this error is pretty scripted, in the sense, like if the child moves the wrong sound, what do you say? There's an answer for that. There's only about 3 or 4 errors that kids make with Build It, with all of our word work activities. There's only a couple errors. So we have the little scripts, if you will, but we're challenging the teacher and hopefully preparing him or her to know to discover what's the real issue and to know which prompt to give. So it's very, it's not scripted at all, in the sense that what you don't do something with everybody on Monday and do something with everybody else on Tuesday, but you learn how to do Build It and how to develop kids in their phonics decoding and how to respond to their errors. So it's really error correction that we provide you coaching on, and not do this on Monday, do this on Tuesday. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Sharon asked how does this mesh with Orton Gillingham? You'll see a lot of overlap, particularly the focus on mapping phonemes and graphemes, matching sounds and symbols. Some Orton Gillingham programs, I believe, do something that looks like Switch It. We kind of up the ante on it. I think you'll see that a little bit more next week. And you'll see a lot of alignment with Write It. But what will be interesting is if we have time to talk about rules next week. We don't teach rules, and we also teach one sound at a time instead of one grapheme at a time. So we would teach O, and we would work on it all week, but teach multiple spellings. That comes up with our sorted activity. So there are definitely some differences, but we've tried to expedite things. Mm-hmm. Just if there's anyone that jumped out at you, Donna, I've got a lot to just scan through. Feel free to.
I think you're good.
Okay.
And if not, we can always touch on it next week.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's a good point. Bridget, we'll talk more about Sort It next week. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd love to hear from those of you in the chat who've done Sort It. Frankly, I've never, we struggle with it because we have not seen kids quickly pick up that phonics knowledge. One thing that we do with Reading Simplified is Switch It actually paves the way to allow phonics information to stick more readily, because we're really developing the phonemic awareness skills so that those phonics pieces of information can be zipped together. So kids learn advanced phonics information more easily when they have phonemic manipulation at an advanced level, which they develop through Switch It. So that's one thing. Also sorting. When you teach them, hey, this is one sound, there are multiple spellings, and you study it for a whole week with different activities and reading passages that do that, it's actually not that hard for them. It's like the concept that one thing can have more than one representation. That's not hard conceptually. The only thing that's hard is the memorization of it. And the activity system that we kind of devise for reading passages, rereading them, and sort it. And also a corollary activity called search for the sound. Those usually help that information zip together. But I hope we can make it more convincing next week.
Is progress monitoring built into the program?
Good question. We have tried to reduce the teacher's burden by not giving a lot of different assessments, because many teachers are coming to the day with a ton of reading assessments. So we can coach you on what you already have and helping you use it. And that's one thing. We also have some informal assessments that you can use repeatedly, but not every week for sure. That could be a form of progress monitoring. But most importantly, the thing that we excel at is actually teaching you every day to progress monitor. We have like a lesson plan that's also an assessment. So you reflect on how do they do, what's their most pressing need. We only ask you a couple of diagnostic questions, like what's the next most challenging phonemic level they can handle? What are the next letter sounds they need to focus on? And that will drive your reading instruction. So each day you're upping the ante for most kids. And so that is kind of built in formal assessment.
Last question. Does the program include decodable texts?
Yes. Yes. We also recommend other things that are supplementary, low cost, and some free, but we have a lot of them, particularly for that advanced code concept. If you're going to teach the O sound and multiple spellings, then you need to have texts that do that. So we have texts that have words with OA and OE and O silent E, and there's all thrown in there so that kids kind of get how that O sound works from the get-go.
And one more, would you recommend using this every day? And how long are the sessions?
Okay. Let me go back to see if I can find where are we? Okay. This is a small group lesson plan. That's our favorite thing. If you can't do small group, then you can do pieces of these whole group. And certainly it works easily with one-on-one. Most of our teachers in the public, in a school setting, I should say, are doing it in small groups for about 20 minutes to 30 minutes. 20 minutes seems to be the norm, sometimes 25. Most people can't get to 5 groups a day though for 20 minutes. So we encourage you to get to your most in need kids every day, or close to every day as you can, and then alternate with others. So, but yeah, it definitely needs to be done every day, because there has to be enough decoding practice to develop that skill, and then the repetition to develop the orthographic mapping. And of course, the kids with weaknesses are going to need the extra practice. But basically, we take this 3-component lesson plan and help you fit it to whatever the demands of your time. As a tutor, I use this lesson plan for an hour and just break it up. Sometimes I'm spending a lot more time in word work, and sometimes I'm spending a lot more time in guided oral reading. Depends on where they are in their development. Lori's asking, is switch it the same as a word chain? Yes, the important part is that you're asking the student to change, not you do the changing. So you say, you have hid, let's change it to hill. So they have to think a whole bunch of things. They have to think, I had hid. What's different between hid and hill? Oh, it's that last one. So I'm going to pull out the d, and now I need to put in a new sound, ul. Now, which one of these is ul? Did you see all the processes that I had to go through to do that? That is the skill that we use to this day when we're stuck with an unfamiliar word. When we read something funny, maybe a Russian word or a new medical word. Coronavirus. Corona, we probably knew the first time because we knew Corona for the beer, or maybe other Latin roots. But anyway, I'm just saying, you play around with sounds and you manipulate them. Coronavirus? No, it's coronavirus probably. And you play around with sounds. You go through steps. You move the sounds in and out of words to find a word that's meaningful. And so, yeah, that is... So other people do word chains, and if they're doing it with an emphasis on making the kid do the work, then you're golden. I highly recommend it. Wendy, yes, same time next week. You're welcome, Jeannie.
All right. I
Should
think we're
we,
good.
how are we doing on time? Should we call it
Yep.
a night,
Call
Donna?
it
I'm
a
happy to
night.
answer questions, but I don't also want
Nope.
to wear people out.
Nope, it's time.
Okay.
So we'll see everyone next week, 7 o'clock. Invite all your friends.
And actually, if you feel like you have a question that I didn't answer and you want to put it in the Facebook thread for this post, I
Yeah,
could probably,
perfect.
between now and then, address it.
Great. All right.
Thanks for all the great questions. I'm sorry I didn't get to every one of them.
Good night, everybody. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to stop.
Thanks, Donna.
Again.